Hello, and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you everything you need to know about the day to come on the election trail.
Hello there, my name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me, like every morning, is Jack Blanchard of Politico. It's day 21 of the election. Yes, the Rishi Sunak called the election 3 weeks ago today, and there are 22 days to go.
Yeah, that means tonight is election solstice. We're exactly halfway through. Doesn't time fly, Sam? I mean, I really feel like this election campaign has been so much more fun than I expected it to be. I sort of had it looming in my head at the start of the year. There's going to be these two boring guys slugging it out, and it would all be very choreographed. I do not mean us. No, we are the exciting moment in everyone's morning. No, I mean the two main party leaders who are obviously not the most thrilling people. And these things are always supposed to be so choreographed. It just hasn't been like that, has it? You know, things have kept going wrong on both sides of the campaign, between the Diane Abbott stuff and the D-Day stuff and the announcement in the rain and the Nigel Farage comeback. I don't know. I found the whole thing far more gripping and exciting and frankly sort of off the rails than I expected it to be. Are you going to be doing some sort of dance tonight to mark the halfway moment?
I'm not necessarily sure I'm known for my dancing, but that rather depends on the nightlife of Grimsby.
You're in Grimsby. Tell us why you're in Grimsby, Sam.
I am in a hotel room in, let's call it Greater Grimsby for operational security reasons, because we are here because tonight is the Sky News battle for number 10. It's a in-depth interview with Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak by my colleague Beth Rigby, and then both take questions from the audience. That's coming up later as part of a 3-day road trip. I was in Ashfield yesterday for the Tory manifesto launch. I ended up being accused by one woman of making her jacket potato go cold because the interview ended up going on for so long. Anyway, such is life on the road. What are the three topics we're talking about today?
I have to say my morning porridge regularly goes cold because of you going on and on and on this podcast, Sam. So I do sympathise with poor lady in Ashfield. Three big things today. Obviously, the Tories are out trying to sell the manifesto that they launched yesterday. Labour are preparing to launch theirs tomorrow. So it's still very much right in the midst of manifesto week, and we need to talk about both of those. The Sky News event tonight is the big media moment. It's the headline and playbook this morning. It's going to be watched by everyone in Westminster and lots of people beyond that. But it comes in the context, Sam, of polling showing that the two main parties appear to be actually less exciting to most people than ever before. So we should talk about that as well. And let's make sure we give a mention to the Green Party, given we're talking about smaller parties doing well. They're launching their manifesto today, and we mustn't miss that. But let's kick off with the sort of fallout from the Tory manifesto. Rishi Sunak is out and about in the sort of vaguely Grimsby area, I think, certainly in the northeast of Lincolnshire, campaigning, trying to hammer home the big announcements he made yesterday. There was some suggestion he might be going abroad tonight, but I don't think that's happening now. Is that right? Either way, he's going to be out there trying to say, look, we're cutting your taxes, we've got a plan for government, you know, don't believe that we're a tired, stale old thing after 14 years. We're the exciting party here with a real raft of policies. And it certainly was a policy-heavy document. You know, whatever else you want to say about the Tory manifesto, there was a lot in it, wasn't there? I mean, it wasn't just a few warm words.
Keir Starmer said it reminded him of the Jeremy Corbyn manifesto. And I have to say, and I know Tories will hate this, but I thought it was quite a shrewd comment, because the issue with Jeremy Corbyn's manifesto in 2019 was that there were lots and lots of things that were individually popular into it, but when people looked at it as a whole, they either didn't think it was deliverable, they didn't believe it would be delivered, or they didn't think it was affordable. And there is just a bit of sniff about this, that there's so much in it. When you look at the demographic appeal for so many of the different policies, it kind of splats everybody. If you're a pensioner, a wealthier family, working family, a first time, but like, you slice and dice who each policy is appealing to, and it's kind of just about everybody. But is it a case a bit of everybody and nobody? One of the things in the bubble, and this is definitely a Westminster bubble thing to do, but it does seep out to look at, is the kind of reaction of people who ought to be tribally loyal. And I was looking at the leader columns of the sort of right-wing press. The Times said that Rishi Sunak had retreated into his inner accountant, and the Mail, which Rishi Sunak really needs to be on his side and is one of the most vocal in pushing the news agenda all around the place, said the biggest problem for the Tories is that they're now promising what they could and should have enacted in 14 years of power, having broken so many pledges in the past why would voters believe a syllable uttered to them, which is fairly tricky reading.
I like to judge how these things have landed, Sam, by talking to some of my sort of normal friends. If I can, sorry if that's offensive to you, Sam, but people that don't live and breathe this stuff.
Am I a non-normal friend?
You're probably the least normal friend, if I'm brutally honest about it. But you have your own charms. But these are people that don't live and breathe politics all the time. And one of them, I just texted one of them saying, what have you even noticed the Tory manifesto? Like, what do you think? And they said to me, it reminded me them of those. If you ring up a broadband company or something and you say you're going to cancel your contract, and then suddenly they come back to you with, oh, actually, we can do all these other deals for you, that suddenly everything's cheaper than it would otherwise have been. And that sense of, why didn't you do this before, is a very, very difficult question to answer for a government that's been in power for such a long time. I do think as well, the other problem it suffers from is that there's a lot of strong vibes in there about we want to cut your taxes, we want to be seen as X, Y, Z, tough on this. But there was so much nuance in it. We're cutting your taxes, but we're also freezing the income tax threshold and pulling loads more people into higher tax bands at the same time. We want to attack eco-zealotry, but we are also sticking to the net zero by 2050 target. We want to cap immigration, but we can't say where the cap is set. Like there's always a caveat, and quite a significant one, with these Tory policies. And the problem is, if you're trying to appeal to, say, people who are thinking of voting reform, there are no caveats with Nigel Farage. He'll just stand up and announce he's going to give you a net zero immigration policy. Whether or not that can be delivered, who knows? But he's painting in primary colours, and it's very hard for the Tories to compete with that. And I suspect that's part of the reason you don't see very much excitement in the right-wing press, or indeed amongst Tory MPs, about this manifesto, even though there is obviously a lot in it.
At time of recording, Jack, it is 6:52 in the morning, and they're hoovering outside the hotel room door. What hotel wakes up all the guests with hoovering? You might just about to be able to pick it up on the micro. Anyway, one of the other curious things that Rishi Sunak has done today obviously he wants to sort of capitalise on his manifesto. But today they're playing out the ITV interview done last Thursday. Now, this is already a famous interview because it's the one that Rishi Sunak left D-Day early to do. But what planet do you do an interview for the day after the manifesto that you couldn't really talk about the manifesto because it hadn't been released in? So strategically, that is sort of hurting my head. Anyway, there are a couple of lines in that are running all over the place. There's an exchange with Paul Brand, the person doing the interview, where Rishi Sunak's quite front. He sort of apologised for being late and goes, the D-Day event overran. Sort of vibes of, the veterans held me up. Which is interesting that oddly they don't then go on to discuss this, and it quite clearly wasn't at that point considered a news event at least by ITV. But I think there are some who are trying to get that up and running as a bit of a moment. And then also Rishi Sunak talking about how the squeeze when he was growing up, and he said famously he didn't have Sky growing up, and that was one of the economies that they had to make. I mean, I don't know what he's got against Sky. I think we need to probe this some more. Do you think these kinds of lines will be noticed, Jack?
The bit on D-Day will certainly be noticed. He sort of comes into the room and says, sorry, I'm late. So the ceremony was incredible, but it overran. And you can see people seizing on that as sort of suggesting it's more tone deafness in the same vein. People who were there with Rishi Sunak on the day are very quick to say, he was actually, doing important diplomacy at the time. He had to go and meet with Emmanuel Macron, and therefore the event went later than it did, and that's what he was talking about. There was a sort of innocent explanation for it, I think, but nevertheless, the big problem for Rishi Sunak and for his operation is that it is now day 6 of this D-Day story. And here we are still talking about it, and it's the very last thing that they want to still be talking about. There are very few gaffes that I can think of, particularly during the election campaign, which are still being talked about a week later. But here we are, sat here on this podcast. I can see it's on the front page of the Telegraph's website right now, that clip of him saying this to Paul Brand. It just won't go away. And it's obviously going to come up tonight at this leaders event in Sky. Either your colleague, Beth Rigby, or one of the members of the audience, I expect, will ask Rishi Sunak about it again. He'll probably have to apologise again. And here we are a week later. You talk about opportunity cost in campaigns when politicians have to spend their time talking about something they don't want to be talking about, instead of talking about the tax cuts or whatever he does want to be talking about. Well, this is that in spades, and it just harms the campaign every single time it comes up.
A word for Labour, their big day tomorrow, remarkably little in the papers, and kind of knocking around from them today. I know just one thing about the manifesto launch. There is chatter from a couple of places that there is going to be a very, very famous person introducing it. Now, I haven't been able to find out who this person is, so I just thought I'd set a whole load of hairs running on this podcast by advertising, any journalist worth their salt. See if you can do better than us, find out who this person is. That there is definitely high excitement around some of the names that it could have been, but it's being kept so close, indeed, if it's true, that I've not managed to penetrate that black box. But let's see if we can get ahead of that.
How exciting! A whiff of celebrity at the Labour Party launch tomorrow. I look forward to that. Could it Tony Blair, maybe Gary Lineker, who's suitably exciting to get us going. Should we talk about the state of the polls, Sam? Because there was a fascinating YouGov poll last night. Not a big MRP one, but a pretty gripping voter intention one, which showed really a surge in support for the parties who were not the Tories and Labour, which I suppose in one sense is not surprising, in that there doesn't seem to be an enormous amount of love for either the Tories or Labour. But still, when you see those figures in black and white, it's pretty amazing. Just tell us exactly what it showed us.
So this was YouGov's sort of weekly poll for Sky, and it kind of knocked things all around the park. I mean, Labour. Now, we've got the new methodology, but even since we did that, it's dropped. And now the Labour figure is under 40 at 38%. So that was quite stark. And we've got to see whether there's a trend there. The Conservatives at their joint lowest in this Parliament, that's on 18, and only 1 point ahead of Reform. The Lib Dems jumped 4 to 15%. But the big point I think worth focusing on is just what that means for the main parties. So here's a stat that's been brought to my attention. In 2017, so that was Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, that general election, the two big parties got 82% of the vote. And that was a high, but that's what happened at that election. In last night's YouGov poll, the Tory Labour vote was 56%. So we jumped from 82 to 56. People clearly look and feel like they're turning away from the main parties, whether it's to the Lib Dems or to Reform or to the Greens, which we'll come on to in a moment. And I have to say, Jack, in Ashfield yesterday, you can pick up this. You can sort of smell it. Now, in Ashfield, the politics lend themselves to people that you stop in the street and interview, talking about Nigel Farage. The lack of enthusiasm and the lack of presence in people's minds of Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer is palpable. In the end, one of those two guys has to be Prime Minister. There's no question about that. But that sense of the sort of draining of authority of the main party leaders is quite something. And my favourite stat of the campaign, which we updated in that poll, 49% of people think Keir Starmer will be a bad PM. So if he wins with a landslide, he comes into power with the British public, their arms folded, going, well then, impress us. And the vibe is going to be very difficult right from the off.
That thing you're describing there is precisely the sense that Nigel Farage picked up on last week when he decided to reverse his decision and stand in this election as leader of Reform. I think he had felt initially he would need much more time to prepare and to launch and to drive a campaign than he was given in a snap election. But what he says is that he picked up on exactly this, and just talking to people, he could see that there was no big love for either main party, and therefore there was an opportunity for a startup party to come in and do well. And he is often right about these things, as we've seen in the past. But I think the thing that none of us saw, or certainly I'm to hold my hands up, I didn't see, was a surge in support for the Lib Dems at the same time. There is no doubt Ed Davey is having a good campaign, right? The sort of mixture of eye-catching, colourful stunts and heartfelt emotion on caring is working for him, and you can see that now reflected in the polls. And people who were thinking they're sick of the Tories, they don't want to get him out, and then saying, but I don't much like Labour, suddenly have a couple of alternatives which are a bit more eye-catching than we might have imagined, and there are people flocking there, and the implications for the outcome of this election are significant, both, as you say, no love for potential Prime Minister Starmer, but also, you know, if we're talking about a parliament with 60 Lib Dem seats, then that's very different to the one we were talking about before.
Another party benefiting from this is the Greens. They're on 8% in that poll last night. It's their manifesto launched today. Co-leaders Adrian Ramsey and Carla Denyer are going to be leading that event alongside Zach Balansky, the deputy leader, and the parliamentary candidates, including Sian Berry, who's a familiar name. Their pitch is they want to make a fairer, greener tax system. The specifics will involve £70 billion a year of new taxes from the wealthiest, including raising NI, which others, of course, aren't doing, to 8% on annual wages above 50,000. Somebody earning over 55,000 would pay an extra £283 a year, and a new wealth tax charged at 1% on all assets worth more than £10 million, increasing to 2% on assets above 1 billion. So the Greens going after the rich, kind of solidifying their role on the left of politics when it comes to economic issues. Do you think this is going to have much of an impact, Jack?
Well, I think the Greens are an interesting story to watch long term. I don't know how much impact they're going to have specifically on this general election, although they certainly fancy their chances of picking up a seat or two. They're targeting very heavily one in Bristol, and of course the one in Brighton that they currently hold, they will be after as well. Whether they can manage 2 seats remains to be seen. But I do think, with Keir Starmer pulling the Labour Party into the centre ground, away from the sort of Corbyn-era project, he has opened up a space on his left flank, and you'll have seen visibly lots of vocal Corbynistas joining the Green Party, supporting the Green Party, really in protest at what Keir Starmer has done. And so you have this noisy, vociferous element now outside Labour attacking them from the left. And I do think in a world where Starmer ends up with a supermajority, which of course is what the polls are telling us at the moment, then that voice could become quite an important one and quite an important critical voice in the national conversation, especially if they get good at social media. And I think there is a suggestion that the Greens are getting better at that stuff. There's one or two of these people, you mentioned Zach Balansky, who get quite good traction on social media with TikTok videos and that kind of thing. And you could see that taking off, particularly amongst younger people and amongst left-wing voters in the next parliament.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see quite what role, the Greens play. They might get up to 2 seats if their bigger target, their harder target, is the Bristol seat of Labour shadow cabinet member Thangam Debonair. Can they decapitate her in the election? Who knows? But we will follow their launch today. I'm here in Grimsby all day. I'll be watching the Sky News debate this evening, doing the verdict afterwards. How about you, Jack?
I'll be watching from my sofa, but I definitely will be tuning in. As I say, it's the main media event of the day, and I do think it doesn't really play into the strength of either of these two leaders. I'll be very interested to see them getting an in-depth grilling from Beth Rigby, but then also the questions from the audience can often really bring those big moments that get clipped up. If they have an awkward exchange with someone in the audience, that can be really tough to watch, and those moments can live long in the memory. So I think both party leaders will be very much on their guard tonight, and I'll be looking forward to that.
Speak to you from Grimsby in the morning.
All right, good luck. Cheers.